The war in Israel claims to be about land, specifically for Palestinians to take their land back and throw off the shackles of Israel's occupation, which is why we are seeing pro-Palestine marches all over the U.S., especially on college campuses. So is that the truth? Is what the mainstream media telling us about the war fact, or is it fiction? Who really owns the land? With so many opposing views being thrown around, it's hard to know what to believe. So I want you to hear directly from an expert on the subject, Robert Spencer. He's the author of The Palestinian Delusion, and we're going to see him respond to Mark Lamont Hill. Check it out.
As we discuss the events that have taken place in Israel and in Gaza over this past weekend, we have to be able to do several things at once. For me, that starts with sending sincere sympathy and condolences to all of the innocent men, women, and children who were killed in the violence that took place in Israel and Palestine over the past weekend. Targeting civilians is a violation of international law. It's a violation of religious law. It is a violation of basic human decency. It must be condemned without excuse. It must be condemned without reservation. Full stop. But we cannot begin or end our analysis with what happened this past weekend. Long before Hamas ever sent a rocket, or even before Hamas was formed, Palestinians have lived under Israeli occupation. Israel control of Gaza, which continues even after the departure of Israeli citizens in 2005, has transformed Gaza into an open-air prison. The conditions in Gaza are literally unlivable and have only gotten worse in recent days. The people of Gaza have consistently lived under military siege, daily violence, and collective punishment. The broader Palestinian community has lived under oppressive military occupation, which has subjected them to dehumanizing conditions within an apartheid state.
Hey, what are your thoughts on that?
There's so many inaccuracies in that. I hope we have time to cover them all. But the first thing is occupation. Gaza is not occupied. It's not occupied physically. There were Israelis there, but they all left in 2005. And the whole idea of their leaving was to bring about peace by ending any occupation. And so there has been no Israeli presence there since 2005. Now, Mark Lamont Hill says, nonetheless, even after they left, they have been oppressing the Palestinians, and it's an open-air prison. Now, why is it difficult for Palestinians to pass from Gaza into Israel? Because many of them, when they get into Israel, have started killing people. Now, unfortunately, when you don't know who's going to kill people and who isn't, you have to have checkpoints and search the people who are trying to come in. That is what the open-air prison is all about, that he's talking about. It's also interesting to note that Egypt has a border with Gaza, and Egypt just closed it. Is Egypt an apartheid state that hates Muslims? Egypt is just concerned about its national security. And Egypt knows, as well as Israel knows, that Gaza is full of jihadis. And they don't want them in Egypt any more than they want them in Israel. And so the fact that the border is closed does not make it an open-air prison. It makes it a recognition of the reality of jihad activity in Gaza. Also, from a legal standpoint, occupied territory suggests that somebody else owns the land. Who owns Gaza? Now, if you ask Mark Lamont Hill, I imagine that he would say the Palestinians. It ought to be a Palestinian state, and the West Bank as well. Now, and actually, since he got fired from CNN for saying from the river to the sea, Palestine would be free, he probably thinks that all of Israel is occupied territory. But there was never a Palestinian state. There was never a Palestinian kingdom, republic, empire, anything you want to name. There was never a political entity that was Palestine. And then people sometimes have said, when I say this, wait a minute, in the 1939 World Book Encyclopedia, there's a flag of Palestine. Yeah, but it's a Star of David. And that's 9 years before the founding of the State of Israel. Palestine was the name of a region. It was the name given to Judea, which means land of the Jews, by the Romans in 134 AD when they expelled the Jews from the area. Many of the Jews didn't leave, and there has always been a Jewish presence in the land. But the last owner of the land was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire fell shortly after World War I. before it fell, just as it was falling, the Ottoman Empire actually ceded legal authority over that land, Gaza and the rest of Israel and the Holy Land, the whole thing, the West Bank, the whole thing, to the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations. The League of Nations gave it to Britain as part of what was called the Mandate for Palestine. The Mandate for Palestine was a specific directive to the British to create a Jewish national home in this land. What was the land that was set aside for the Jewish national home? All of what is today Jordan and all of what is today Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. The British immediately gave the whole eastern part to the Arabs, and that's Jordan. But they set aside the rest for the Jewish national home. So what does that mean? Israel is the Jewish national home. The only country in the world that actually has a legal claim to the land of Gaza is Israel. Now, Egypt occupied Gaza from 1948 to 1967, and that's another interesting thing. You didn't hear a word about occupation then, and that's because this is really a religious conflict, and it's all about hating Jews and all about not wanting to recognize Jewish authority over Muslims, because the Muslims, as Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, said, Islam must dominate and not be dominated. And so they didn't mind when Egypt was occupying, and nobody talked about occupied territory, even though that was an actual occupation. Nobody minded, and nobody talked about Palestinian rights. The Palestinians, as a matter of fact, are not mentioned in the history of the world until the 1960s. There were no Palestinians. When Israel declared its independence in 1948, they were the Arabs of the local area. The Palestinian nationality was created in the 1960s as a rhetorical weapon against Israel. And it's worked very well. But the fact is, the non-anger of Egypt while Gaza was under its occupation for 19 years is an indication that this is really all about Islam and the Jews. And the Egypt being Muslim, there was no problem about occupation while Egypt was in Gaza.
Those are the facts. It's not what the mainstream media is telling us, but it's the truth. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.